Hello and welcome back to another Hallowoods live stream backstage Q&A affair. Thank you so much for tuning in as always, not only to the show, but also to these little behind the scenes featurettes and so forth. If you're watching this in the distant future, I cannot help you, but there's probably other Q&As happening sometime that you can attend. But if you're watching this in the present, the way it works each week is that patrons can submit questions to the fancy patrons ask box, and then I answer those questions. I will also answer any questions that pop up in the chat during the stream if I can. And so the chat can be found, I believe, by accessing the live stream on the YouTube side of things. You can drop questions in there throughout, and then once I'm through the patrons ask box, I'll get to any in the chat that I can. That said, and this is one of many weekly Q&A live streams. These will be continuing over the next couple of weeks before we get to the end of season 4, and then afterwards, I'm sure, into season 5 and beyond. So feel free to drop questions in the ask box for later. Feel free to ask them in the chat now, and we can commence. So this has really been a continuation over these last couple of weeks of just working through these last couple episodes of the show. And we are getting into some fairly transformative turf in these last couple episodes left. I think we are at maybe 5 episodes left out of the 30 that comprise this season. So we are very rapidly approaching our close to season 4. Or rather our transition into season 5 and all that it brings. So there will hopefully, again, fingers crossed, but because we don't have a date set in stone yet for season 5 to return, we are hoping that it will be just a couple weeks of break before jumping back in for the next season. And not kind of the months and months wait time that you had between seasons 3 and 4. However, still a little bit up in the air as we just kind of take in the scope of work that's going to be involved in the next season, and just how much time it's going to take to kind of plan ahead and get things ready in advance for whatever the season requires. But it is at the stage now where season 5 kind of moves into active planning for those first few episodes, even as we still have a lot to do for the end of this season and finishing up kind of our current parcel of episodes. So that said, it has been such a delight to get to work on season 4 so far, and a really, as far as I can tell, a fairly unexpected direction for the show in the aftermath of season 3, but one that I've enjoyed quite a bit as well. And I think a change up for the story that's going to echo over the next 2 seasons in a pretty significant way. I think as we get into these last few episodes for the season, we'll start to see just a little bit more of all the reasons why I wanted to write this season in the first place, and kind of build into our big finale for season 4. So that said, that kind of continues on, and that's probably the main focus right now. Other than that, still working on merch design and sort of reinvention of our merch setup, in order to sort of get set up for a new online store, a new merch provider, and new stuff that you'll be able to get if you want stuff. Although I can't blame you for not wanting stuff in today's sort of limited economy. That said, that is kind of the B project that is big for the Hallowoods right now. And other than that, continuing work in the background, just as 100 Eyes in the Dark continues to hurtle towards publication someday. And also, I do have glances and outlines and even a couple chapters written of the next novel that comes after that. But the immediate priority might just be getting season 4 done and kind of seeing the story through, since that's going to eat up a lot of the creative time right now. And there's a lot left to do to pull the season through to its completion. So that said, we do have a question in the patrons ask box today. After that, I'll get over to the YouTube chat. So feel free to drop any questions in there that you like, and I'll reach them shortly. Our one question is from Lindsay. And Lindsay asks, I've been on a big X-Men kick at the moment, return hyperfixation lol, and I was wondering if you have taken any inspiration from any comic series for the Hallowoods. This is a really good question, and I think the answer is yes. There are a few. I don't have any of them on me, but as I was saying a little bit last week, way back when I went through a stage where I was reading a new comic series that had just started coming out, which was IDW's take on the Transformers. And back in the day, they would eventually get into a much a much better like sort of string of stories. More than meets the eye is a lovely like take on the Transformers. I think it's maybe one of the only times Transformers has ever been well written. And that series of comics, which would later become the Lost Light storyline, I think. But that's a series about a bunch of characters going on sort of an intergalactic quest together. And as they go about that quest, you almost get this like James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy sort of character work for every like character that makes it into it. It feels very much like the James Gunn take on the Transformers. He has nothing to do with it, but that is the vibe. And so you get some just amazing like vignettes and stories and character work that is almost entirely absent from this franchise otherwise. And so that is a delightful series. But way before that, before they had access to any of that good stuff, they did a very early when they were just starting out. They did a couple of different like comic lines, where they had these big graphic novel books, and then they also had smaller collections of one-shot issues called Spotlights. Now, I was reading the mainline installments, I guess, the mainline chapters. Couple Transformers on Earth toddle around, see some evil scientists scheme against each other. The usual drama. They make some spunky human friends, as they do. But along the way, and weirdly enough, they take a break in the middle between two big Earth chapters to do this big, like kind of Cybertron-based storyline. I think called Stormbringer, which is basically a Frankenstein's monster story on Cybertron, which is excellent. Just some very, very cool drama and characters out of that. And a number of great, a term called Furmanisms. There was a writer for Transformers named Simon Furman. And Simon Furman had a number of different sayings that he liked to use a lot. And so they keep cropping up in his work over and over again. And some of them are very specific, like, but I think one is like, but I know deep down it is never finished. And I love that. I also love up ahead like a great vast predatory bird. And these crop up frequently. And I think as writers, we all have our own Furmanisms to some extent. I'm sure after 160 plus episodes, mine have become very apparent. So I've always kind of pocketed that for the future. But that said, what really spoke to me during that time was that in addition to these big storylines and chapters that they had this little series of one-shot, tiny story snippets called Spotlights. And the Spotlights followed individual characters, and at first just seemed like sort of a fun like set of episodes, like sort of one-shot moments. But then as you looked closer, you began to find that each of these installments happened somewhere in the bigger grand scheme of things as the main story was going. that conversations had between two of these like one shots would tie together, that some of these little story moments would explain why things were a certain way in the main story. It just added a lot of context and dozens of perspectives to the sort of bigger thread of the world. And I reread them after that, went looking for more like connections and ways that it all like stuck together, and explanations of what was going on. And so that aspect really resonated with me. And I knew after that that at some point I had to do a story that worked that way, where you would get dozens of different perspectives that would all kind of meld into a bigger whole and help fill each other out and connect in unexpected ways and sort of tie together into one big thread of the story. And so early on, I knew that that was a project that I needed to do at some point. It would be years later before the idea to do it for the Hallowoods, and kind of using that like making that the massive multi-perspective story that it would end up being. It would come a bit later for that, but after that I knew it was on the bucket list. So the IDW Transformers Spotlight series definitely, was an early inspiration. I've been a fairly big comic reader, not so much for comic issues, but graphic novels from time to time, or big like comic collections. I have yet to catch up on the rest of it, but there's an excellent, I believe, Image Comics called Saga. And Saga is a sci-fi fairy tale about a planet of television-headed people and a planet of fairy tale people getting into a galactic space war with each other. But the way that they do their world building is just incredible, where you can have like a rocket ship that is a magical tree that is designed to like grow and supply in space and sort of bioorganically provide for all the people on board the tree. You have things like, I don't know, kind of a drow spider lady who is this galactic assassin. You get it's just really interesting takes on the logistics of living in a kind of a fantasy fairy tale-ish society. And I think I definitely, that world building and especially that aesthetic style clicked with me a lot. And there's some lovely, I think, parallels in the way that Saga is, in a way, kind of a love story across several generations, with this whole space war and political conflict and everything sort of happening in the background, always affecting the lives of these characters as they go about their business. But at the end of the day, like, it hones in on that family's perspective to take us through kind of the greater multitudes of this world. So that I really enjoyed that aspect. And then also it's just an excellent showcase of putting really weird stuff in the world together and having it be fairly assumed that those are the norms of the world, and presenting those in sort of a grounded way, even when the concepts themselves are very far out. So I loved that note for when it comes over to the Hallowoods side of things, having all of these huge and horrific and strange characters kind of coexist, like the Museum of Broken Promises and the Grackle and Big Mikey and Rothogroth and a dozen other, the Phantom Station, and a dozen other random things that all kind of live within the weird fabric of the world and are just a granted part of it and have their own rules and things that bind them to the world. So I enjoyed that for sure. There's a single issue of the X-Men that is New X-Men 127, I believe. And this one, I think I probably found it at a used comic shop originally. I parted with a small comics collection at one point, and then I ended up finding it, going back because I missed having the story on the shelf, and kind of hunting down that copy again later. but it follows one of my favorite X-Men characters who has a bit of a trouble, a bit of a writer's trouble. But in this story, his name is Zorn. He has a sun for a head, like a ball of nuclear fission. And he has that contained inside of this iron mask that keeps his sort of like ball of energy head contained and masked away so that people can be around him without him exploding them. Um, and it is sort of a slice in the life, a day, I guess, a day in the life of Zorn as he goes about like a little mission in a neighborhood, and finds that there is this mutant child that is turning into this huge guinea pig Hulk-like monstrosity, um, and trying to like save this child, and ultimately failing, to kind of manage to save it from like this mob of angry pedestrians, pretty much. Um, but then after that, there are some kind of wonderful monologues about his own past, about kind of the cycle of love and grief, and ultimately like the little things and the little experiences and the people you can help sometimes that continues to like give you the reason to keep living. And so it was a lovely little vignette. And so I definitely, I think especially when it comes to a look at characters that are monstrous and finding the humanity in them, and just kind of I guess the like sad but still hopeful philosophical notes I loved from that issue. So I've kept it around. Probably the last comic I'll mention on the list is a delightfully weird one called Styx Angelica Folk Hero. And it is a collection of comic strips, and they're all done in this white and pink. And it is done by a comic author named Michael DeForge, who would also work on shows like Adventure Time and Steven Universe. And also, in a way, he's a friend, I believe, of Lisa Hannawalt, who does the art style for BoJack Horseman. And there is a character named after her in this book. But Styx Angelica Folk Hero is a story about this very buff, angry folk hero woman who lives in like northern Canada, and all of her friends and like collaborators up there are various wildlife, and it's a kind of both kind of quirky and yet often philosophical ranging, just set of collections about her year and her life up in that place, dealing with these various sort of animals who are both cruel and also like cute at the same time. But I think from there's a couple characters I really love out of the story. One is like a fish who's been marked for death, and another is a moose who wants to be a human businesswoman. And ultimately, she achieves her goal and gets to go like work in finance and wear human clothes. But there's something about Styx Angelica's kind of means of existing with all these weird animals that surround her that I really enjoyed, and also just North Ontario, as a comic setting, is great. So those are some of the comics that have probably swayed me in some way. I'm sure there's more that I can't think of just at the moment, but I definitely have dabbled in a few. There are some other lovely graphic novels that I could talk about as well, but if I did, we would probably be here all day. But that said, we do have a question. Possible, yes, we do have at least one in the chat as well, which I will get into. So Beanie says, "Hello. Do you have a favorite character to write or voice?" And to this, that is a tricky question. um, just because there are, I think, a lot of characters that are my favorite to write or voice. And sometimes which ones I can get for the story at a particular time change quite a bit as well. Um, so I think in this season, for instance, and I guess spoilers for character names, but Vincent and Voltaire have just been a constant like source of interest to get to both sort of script and then perform. Um, I think also Shank this season is just a very interesting one to tackle. And every time he gets a scene, I am just always trying to figure out like how to be kind of unique to him in the way that he communicates, in what he says. He is a character that probably should not speak as much as he does, just in keeping with the tropes that he has. So that balance of trying to not lessen a character's intimidation by getting to know them better, and trying to write a character who remains unsettling the more that you get to know him, is something I've really enjoyed trying to tackle with this guy. There are some others that have gotten part any old bird type of character, and I think yeah oh, and I mean Shelby has just been a total delight to get to write this season. Definitely an interesting like delve into her personality and her vibe a little bit. Um, and so there's been a lot just in this new season that I've really enjoyed getting to do. But looking back over the seasons that have come before, I think one of my all-time favorites was probably Mr. Raven and Mr. Writing Desk, because I love the kind of banter that they have back and forth constantly. And getting to both write that and then kind of like act out both sides of a constant argument, is always a lot of fun. Um, I always enjoy Diggory's dialogue just because they're very sort of on the outskirts of the conversation and would like to be included, but don't quite have a lot of social context. And so I love a character that is just slightly very earnest, but also a little bit clueless at the same time. And let's see. I also love characters who have very unique voices but don't show up very much. Um, Mr. Mix Morel and the Museum of Broken Promises. That's always a lovely time when that character makes an appearance. And I really enjoy that sort of cadence that they've got going. Um, I think Rothagroth is one I've mentioned before, but I love any mushroom character. So, I mean, just Rothagroth's thing is pretty much Orson Welles as Unicron's thing, and I'm always trying to find that every time. I think the Venus doesn't get a lot of screen time, but I enjoy that character quite a bit, and just the vehemence that the Venus feels with everything is fascinating, compared to just Milo, who is also always around in the sequences and is just a lot more polite and little and soft spoken. I think definitely another one that is oh, there's a couple of characters that get to be these villainous archetypes a little bit, or maybe I guess are sometimes humble in the surface of the presentation, but we know narratively wield a lot of power. And so the Phantom Station is just a great one every time it shows up. And it might I'm not sure if we'll get the chance to hear from it again. We will see. And it's too cool a thing not to revisit at some point. But it kind of promised 3 visits and delivered 3 visits. So I enjoy some of those things, even though knowing that this character will only get like a couple of scenes and that's it. I really enjoy the Faceless King, because again, we don't get a whole lot of time, but I enjoy trying to make those scenes and those conversations kind of memorable or unexpected, or I always enjoy the chance when we get to talk with something that is ethereal, eldritch, and monstrous, and not really of this world, and not generally of the talking variety. I think the other one that operates a lot like that is Creep, who later on is just delightful, and definitely was. I'm not sure like what direction I necessarily had decided to shoot for with Creep originally, but once I found that cadence and that voice for the character, it suddenly became like very clear who the Creep was and who the like what kind of personality needed to echo through each of these interactions. So there's just too many over the course of it. Ray is another great one. I love Ray. And that is a character that I think has gotten not necessarily more screen time than expected, but the fandom love for that character has been very strong. So I'm hoping for more Ray in the future. And also along those lines, Barb is also just I love a chatty character, and Barb is always fast with the comebacks and the sweet talking. So I enjoyed that a lot for sure. But yeah, those are a spattering of the characters that I really enjoy, both writing, voicing. And so I'm definitely looking forward to getting to revisit some of them as time goes on. Beanie in the chat says, those web connected stories are the reason I loved They Both Die at the End, which I have not seen or read yet, but I do need to. It is on the like to see list. Sketchbook Gremlin says, hello, not sure if I can stay for long, but good to be here. And I thank you for stopping by. Always great to see you. Lindsay says, Shank's voice always puts me on edge in a good way. It's so good. Shanks is one of those that has a limited a limited lifespan. I can get a couple of takes for Shank out of a scene, but his voice definitely I cannot do indefinitely. Solomon's voice is another one that wears a lot, as does Big Mikey's, although a little bit less. I think he's gotten a little bit less shrill as time has gone on, which helps. And the Omen. The Omen is a character I love to write and voice, but definitely one that has a little bit of just a lot of wear and tear on the old vocal cords as well. And it's always rough when hitting the end of a scene with one of those characters and deciding to have to do it again, because it it becomes more of a strain as time goes on. So there are some of those characters where it's like, all right, after this, I'm not going to be able to voice act very well for the next few days. I'm going to need to give it time to, heal pretty much. But that said, that probably wraps us up for a Q&A today. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in as always. And I hope you enjoy more Hallowoods Season 4 coming up around the bend. Feel free to drop questions in for next week for more Q&As in the near future. And I'll see you around the bend. Take care.